Empower Radio presents Simple Steps, Real Change with Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey. You'll find inspiration, support, and simple steps to help you on the path to a better life. Simple steps lead to real change. Here are your hosts, Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey.
Hi, everyone. If setting a boundary with a certain person in your life would give you the power to reach for your dreams, would you set it? And what if by establishing a precedent of what's acceptable behavior to you, you release the tethers that have kept you down? Tonight, our guest is Regina Cates of Romancing Your Stone, and we're talking about setting boundaries out of love for yourself. Kenny and I are excited to have Regina back on our show tonight. First, though, we're hearing a lot of comments from our Facebook friends that they're not able to move forward, that something they did or didn't do is eating them apart. Kenny, what advice do you have for our friends?
Well, first of all, most of what people are feeling when they're getting that something eating at them is usually a form of guilt. And I want to challenge you to start looking at guilt in a different way. Look at guilt as a call to action instead of a reason to beat yourself up. Guilt does not mean I've got to go forgive myself, doesn't mean I need to do this, that, or anything else. It just means do something. And when you take that step, whatever that guilt is calling you to do, it allows you to break out of your rut and break out of that beating yourself up, even if it's just a little bit. That's a step in the right direction. And let that step grow into another, and then another, until you can work your way back out of it. But whatever you do, stop the self-abuse.
It's amazing, isn't it, how when one little thing goes wrong or not the way we want it to go, all of a sudden that escalates into everything being wrong, and then we start beating ourselves up, like you say, because you did or didn't do something. And it's like, it needs to stay in context. And that's sometimes hard for people to do, especially when, as you say, they're feeling guilty about something. We had one person the other day who was feeling guilty for something that she didn't do 20 years ago, but she didn't know that she should do 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you can't go back into that space because it doesn't help you in any way, and it doesn't change anything. Right.
Take realistic responsibility. I will never tell anybody to shirk your responsibility. Just take realistic responsibility. Cheryl is not responsible for what I do in my house. And she can take all the responsibility she wants to, but she will never, no matter what kind of illusion she plays on herself, she'll never be responsible for what I do. So that's not realistic for her to try to do that. All she can do is be responsible for her. So realistic responsibility, take a step, break that vicious cycle. You will work your way out of it.
Well, Kenny, I think that's a really good point. So I'll use the example here. I could feel very guilty because Jack got cancer again. But that's not realistic responsibility or realistic guilt because there wasn't anything that I could do or not do that would have kept him from getting cancer. Now, is there something he could have done in the process? We don't know the answer to that, but we can't sit here and worry or be upset about what we did or didn't do. We just have to figure out, what are we going to do right now about it? Mm-hmm. What can we do? That gives us the power to act in this moment to then be able to move forward.
Right. Because
all that stuff about, dealing with the past, and yes, we have to come to terms with things, but we can't change it. Mm-hmm. All right, there are people that believe that we can change our past, but realistically, that's another story.
Yeah, you cannot go back and change the actions that happened. You can change your perception about it.
Exactly.
Which does change that event. Okay, right. My son died in 1991. I cannot change the facts that he died. I can change my perception of that event, which changes that entire event.
And in your case, you honor his life.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that makes all the difference. We all have things that we've done in the past. I sit here and look at my decision as far as my work environment was concerned. Could I have done it differently? Yes, but by doing what I did, I'm here. I'm on the radio with you guys, and this is fun. It's yes, it was a hard road to go through, but I've come to this better place. And if we just look at it for what the lesson is and what we can then take forward, we're going to be so much farther ahead than just sitting there and going and worrying about what we did or didn't do.
Yeah. The worry does nothing but take away your power.
Well, and that's an interesting topic for tonight because we're our guest tonight, Regina Cates. This is Regina's 4th appearance on Simple Steps Real Change. She is wildly popular. Everyone loves when she comes in here. She's a spiritual and inspirational author, a speaker, and a coach. And with almost 40,000 fans on our Facebook page, Romancing Your Soul, Regina shares a message of hope and love, and I think that's what tonight's about. And I like the fact that she has a new book that is in the work called Live Each Day as You Want to Be Remembered. It's a series of essays on what it looks like to live as a spiritual being on a great human adventure. And tonight, Regina is going to help us regain power and find our power by literally setting our boundaries. So, Regina, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Kenny. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, yeah, you're becoming a veteran with us now. We love this.
I love it. I'll just move in. That's great.
Yeah.
We're good Regina, with that, Regina.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Yeah. Well, Regina, let's kick this thing off by defining boundaries. How do you define boundaries?
Boundaries are the limits that we set to take care of and to protect ourselves, Kenny. You know, we have to establish limits of what we are going to tolerate from other people as far as their behavior, about our availability, about our time, about the conditions under which we will interact with people. So that's what a boundary is that we decide what is acceptable behavior for us, and we establish that very clearly with those people in our lives.
Well, Kenny, I've got to say, I have to establish a boundary right here and right now, and that's one that, please don't beat me up, but I didn't give people the call-in number.
So neither did I.
For anyone that wants to ask a question of Regina or Kenny and I, the telephone number is 248-809-3475. Again, 248-809-3475. And if you don't want to talk on the telephone, I've got email going, and you can send an email to simplesteps@me.com. Again, simplesteps@me.com. So, Regina, let me ask you another question. You say that we should set boundaries out of love for ourselves. What do you mean by that?
I mean that, Cheryl, if we do not establish what it is that we will tolerate from other people, and tolerate seems like a sort of a harsh word, but the behavior that is acceptable to us, then other people will treat us as we allow ourselves to be treated. So basically, people will treat us as we allow them to. So if we have low self-esteem, or if we don't have a good idea of what love is, which is defined as behaviors, such as self-respect and cooperation, if we're not those to ourselves, then it's easy for other people to push past that, to use us or abuse us in any way that they want to. That's why we have to establish boundaries. We have to do this so that we don't have any anger or regret or resentment. We have talked on this show before about our parents and their generation and how, certain women were told that this is what they had to do, maintain the house and everything and, cook and all of this, and how over time they grew resentful of that because they wanted to experience more in life. So there needs to be a boundary set within healthy relationships as to what behaviors we'll tolerate.
Regina, I think that's a really good point, and we did talk. I think I recall talking about my mother's generation where they did whatever the husbands wanted to do, and that was their role, and that's what was expected of them, and they didn't know to do anything different, or didn't even feel empowered to be able to do that. So now we've got subsequent generations where we see things a little differently, but yet we hesitate to set those boundaries. In some cases, we hesitate to set the boundaries for fear we'll be unpopular or somebody won't like us.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am okay with being unpopular with people who are going to abuse me, okay? And I've learned that, and I can say that with all, brevity, I guess, because I have learned the very hard way, Cheryl, that if I do not set boundaries with certain people, or really with all people, because I have boundaries in my own personal relationships, even within my family and within my significant other and everything. If I don't do that, then those people that have the tendency to abuse or take advantage of will do so. So this is actually out of love for yourself. It's out of respect for yourself because you have a responsibility, we all do, to set healthy boundaries so that we establish healthy relationships. You know, we're surrounded by people that do not know how to establish healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important. I kind of heard you allude to it a little bit, but one boundary doesn't work for everybody. Mm-mm. You have different boundaries for different people depending on how intimate you are with them.
Well, absolutely, Kenny, and it's very important early on in this conversation to establish that we do not set boundaries to change other people. Okay, this is not about control. We establish boundaries to define acceptable behavior, to calmly, claim the status of a healthy adult. And it's also a big commitment to our own self-respect. You know, I'm not going to be a doormat, but for many years I was. So I was abused by those people who would take advantage of me. Now I can spot them because I have healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's important because, and you were talking about this a little bit, there is a whole range of abuse here. So, I mean, abuse, we tend to think in the egregious physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the case may be, but we're also talking about abuse in the manner of people just taking advantage of
certainly.
us. Hey, you're easy, you get to do all this, let me dump on you.
Mm-hmm. Or in the case of a retailer, there used to be a long time ago, I don't think it's the case anymore, maybe it is, where some of these car repair places would work on commission. So, you drive your car in there and the guys are going to, because their salary is going to increase the more they sell, they're going to up the things in the list of everything that's wrong with your car if they're not impeccable and above board and have the moral fiber to stay people of character. And that happened to me on several occasions, and I would walk away with this huge bill for repairs that were not necessary.
Well, that brings up a great point. We kind of started out discussing how to set boundaries with people already in our lives. How do you go about setting a boundary with somebody that you just run across at the repair shop?
Well, it depends, Kenny, on what this is, and I think part of it is that we have to understand that we have to be responsible for determining what is acceptable behavior. I really do believe that we are responsible for determining what abuse is, what it looks like, because it is a wide range of things, from sexual abuse to just being psychologically abused, to being put down constantly, to being ripped off at certain places. And I think we have to be the one that investigates, and we have to be the one, certainly in a case of, an auto repair shop, we know sort of in our gut when something's not right. Women have been taught, at least I was, that you really don't know what you're talking about, but you really do. You sort of feel that it's not right. You don't have to be an auto mechanic to know that a basketball rolling around in your trunk is not a whatever they said it was. I don't have to be a mechanic to know that.
Regina, that's an interesting conversation, because when we first moved up here to Oregon, obviously I was out there trying to find a new auto repair shop, new doctors, all those kind of things. And what I've come to do, and it's part of setting boundaries, is you walk in and you interview them.
Absolutely.
And you ask them questions. And
yes, ma'am.
We were very blessed to be able to go in and ask one-on-one, and the person that actually ran the shop was a husband and wife team, and I got a chance to talk to the wife, and I just said, here's the thing. I'm used to people not being straight with me. I need honest answers. I need to know that I can walk in here and trust you to do the right thing. And she said, let me explain how we do this so you understand we're putting everything out on the table so you clearly understand what we're going to do, what it's going to cost, and what our assurances are. And believe it or not, this company has done that every single time. Me as a woman has walked my car or taken my car, my truck, into this shop, even though the person that I've been met with in most cases is a man. They do the exact same thing. So you establish that precedent and you know what to expect.
Yeah, it's the same operating principle whether it's a personal relationship that we go into or it's a relationship in business, and that is that successful relationships are based upon shared values. So we have a wonderful auto repair guy that is totally honest and totally above board, and we know that, but it's based upon the shared values. And if the first time it doesn't work out, then you realize that there's something that is not shared there and you move on. We can't always know going into it, no matter how much research we do. But I tell you what, I think it's Oprah that says, fool me once and it's on me, and fool me twice and then, it's my responsibility. Or fool me once, it's on whatever. However she says that, it's beautiful.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Yeah, because that's exactly how it is for us, too, in all relationships. So do your homework.
All right. Well, I would like to kind of get back to the people that are in our lives that we know, and kind of go down that path, because in so many cases what we hear are, it's always been this way, it's too hard to change it, what do I do?
Well,
so, for example, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hey,
no, you go
it.
right ahead. Give me an example. Perfect.
I was going to say, for example, it is a parent who has always believed that they can tell the child, even though they're older, how to live their lives, from this is what you need to do in the job, this is the clothes you need to wear. I'm the parent, I tell you what to do. How do you set those boundaries?
Yeah, it's interesting because part of this is that you learn to, there's a saying, I guess, you choose the battles that you choose to fight. Yeah. And one of the things that my parents, I'm going to be 56 on Tuesday, and I'm certain that in some way that they're still going to tell me exactly what I should do or not do. I think that's the role of a parent all of the time. One of the things that we can do as people who are striving to be better is to understand that they're coming from a place that they really do care. I believe that they do. And therefore, we might not be able to, we cannot change them, Cheryl. We cannot control them. They're probably always going to do this. What I would do is I would go to my parents, and I have on many occasions, and say, hey, you know what? I've got this. I appreciate the advice so much, but this is how I feel that it's necessary to run my life. That's a very easy boundary. The boundaries that we really have difficulty with are those when we really are being abused. Psychologically, emotionally, physically. Those are the boundaries that are really, really tough to break. Because
all right, give us an example.
Well, someone who is being humiliated. You're not good enough, you're shamed, whatever these things, being humiliated, and they're still in that particular circumstance, it becomes extremely difficult to set a boundary and to if you are unable to remove yourself from that. Do you see what I mean? If it's any kind of physical abuse, then I say remove yourself immediately. If it's one of these circumstances, and I receive emails all the time, and I'm sure you do too, where someone is being psychologically abused, the thing that I recommend if they cannot leave that particular relationship is to do the very best that they can to not take that personally, to understand that if they are not being physically hurt, to understand that this is the way that this person sees the world, but it's not necessarily accurate to how these people actually are.
Sure. One of the things that I will tend to say to people as they're running into that circumstance, especially if it's someone in the family or someone's close that is totally non-supportive, and you're trying to get out of, the black hole, so to speak, or you're trying to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move forward, and you've got someone who's just saying you're always going to be a failure, you're never going to get there. They're being truly mentally abusive, and you have to be able to say to them, I understand you're concerned about me, but your constant derogatory remarks are not helping me move forward, and I need you to support me. I know you love me. I need your support, and if you cannot give that to me, I need to distance myself from you because I need to be able to heal, and that to me is a boundary.
Well, it is, and part of clearly, we have to clearly express our feelings, and the way to do that is to say, when you speak to me disrespectfully, I feel sad or blamed or attacked. I want you to treat me with patience and respect. So when we set boundaries, there's really a formula. When you do this, I feel this, and then you ask them for what you want.
And there's a couple of things here that I need to throw in. There are many people, many situations that you do not feel safe to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Remember this. No is all you need to say for now.
That's right. It's a complete sentence, Kenny.
Yep.
Exactly. No is a complete sentence. Say no. Tell them you will explain later, but for now, no, this is not going to be tolerated.
That's right. And, that's very important. That's a very important point you're bringing up, because when we set boundaries, we do not have to have an explanation. We don't have to go into this long dissertation about why it's necessary. We set what the boundary is, and then we move forward from there. Yeah. Because there's other processes after that.
Oh, yeah. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up about what Regina was just saying, and she said it beautifully, she said, when this happens, I feel. That's the way to do this. Now, a lot of people fall into that trap of, when this happens, you make me feel. That's not true. They don't make you feel anyway. An action has a consequence. So when you get into you make me feel this way, you're giving away your power, and you're also putting the blame on them.
And you don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Even if they're responsible because they're continuously abusing you verbally, you still want to rise above that, because here's one of the things that I like, and that's the Albert Einstein quote that says, everybody knows this, problems cannot be changed at the same level of awareness that created it.
Exactly.
So part of setting boundaries, and the very important thing to remember that is that the only thing that will change is for you to change you. The only thing that will change this circumstance is for you to change you, because you are the one that realizes that this behavior is unacceptable. The people that are doing this have done this all of their life, and they're going to, or maybe not, or whatever, but they're used to doing this. This is acceptable behavior. That's why at the very, very beginning, we have to know what acceptable behavior is. You have to actually sit down, because if you've come from an abusive family, then chances are that you might consider, to a certain extent, these things normal.
Yeah.
They're not.
And I think that people tune in. If they tune into their feelings, they'll start feeling something's not in sync. Let's just pay attention to that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the things happens, though, Kenny, when we come from abusive circumstances, even if it's psychological abuse, which is absolutely horrible, it's what I endured, too, and I'm sure y'all did, too. You get used to that and you sort of shut down. Anyone who is being abused on a regular basis, regardless of what that abuse is, they shut down their emotions. So it's sometimes very difficult to say, I feel this. And part of taking your power is to be able to identify how that behavior makes you feel. And when you identify that and own that, then you can state it in a way that is going to set the boundary for you, whether they hear it or not.
Yeah. And just please, everybody that's hearing this, please do not take this as you need to learn how to say this before you set your boundary. That's what we were kind of getting at a minute ago. Use no for now. And, go ahead and set that boundary, and then you can come back and have that conversation.
Absolutely, because this is an art, and it takes time to learn. When I first started doing this, I was a little bit worried because I didn't want to have people not like me. And then, what I figured out? I don't want those people to like me if they don't respect my boundaries.
Exactly.
So
true. So true. Yeah.
That's an extremely important point, too, because in the comment that you made, and I want to go back to this about no being a complete sentence, there is nothing wrong with that no, and walking away and saying, this isn't the right time to have this conversation. I need to have time to go think. I'll come back and have it when I'm ready to have it. So you distance yourself from any further discussion, because that's just going to escalate into something that you are not prepared to handle.
And that's where the new level of awareness comes in, because you can't fight fire with fire. We can't ego box. There's that term that I need to throw out here once again tonight. We cannot ego box with other people. That's what Einstein meant by you've got to bring a higher level of responsibility and a higher level of awareness. So if you know that this behavior is detrimental, you know, we all know that child sexual abuse is detrimental. It's not positive. And if you know this, then the only opportunity that you have to change is to change you and change your perception of it. And then you can start setting boundaries out of love for yourself, because it's with the higher awareness. And anything with the higher awareness, the universe is going to align with.
Mm-hmm. Well, Regina, that's wonderful, and we're going to continue this conversation here in just a few minutes. We are heading into break. When we come back, I want to be sure we start talking about what happens when we avoid setting boundaries as well. We'll be back in just a few.
And now, back to Simple Steps, Real Change with Cheryl Maloney and Kenny Brixey on Empower Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. Just a reminder, we do have a call-in line tonight that is open. If you'd like to call in and ask a question of Regina, Cheryl, or myself, the number is 248-809-3475. Again, that's 248-809-3475. Or if you would rather, you can send us an email at simplesteps@me.com, and we will do our best to get to your question. Before we left, we started talking a little bit, or I mentioned that we wanted to talk about what happens when we avoid setting a boundary. Regina, I know that you have a lot to say about that, so I'm just going to throw it right back to you. What good does that do, if any?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Kenny, because we tell ourselves that we don't want to be the one that makes waves, and we don't want to rock the boat, or we want to keep the peace, and we want to be the one who smooths over the unpleasant situations. But what that really is codependent. Mm-hmm. If we do not address the behavior that is unacceptable, then we are actually, and this is the kicker, this is where we all need to sit down, we are actually enabling other people to continue to behaving badly. You know, I realized that when I didn't stand up against the abuse and disrespect that I got, that it was actually helping to keep the abuse and negative situation alive.
Doesn't it tend to almost set well, it's almost like giving permission, isn't it?
It's exactly what we're doing, because if we are not, you know, one of the things that you said, I believe, earlier in the conversation, maybe it was in the pre-conversation, it's about, you know, the children need to be better than the parents. We need to evolve as a planet into doing things differently. And if we come from a place where people think it's okay to abuse and verbally abuse, in order to bring more light to the planet, we need to change this. And one of the ways that we do that is to challenge these ways of being the best that we possibly can. Because if we do not do that, Kenny, then we're basically saying, here, abuse me, that it's okay behavior. It's what I've learned. Just because we've learned it does not mean that it is correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You know,
wow.
So we have a tendency to keep that behavior going. You know, one of the things I think is all of the attention that's being brought to bullying now, because for so long people have not wanted to address this particular issue, and it continues within schools, and it continues within, you know, over the internet and all of these other things. We need to bring light to it so that we can shine the light on it, so that we can show that it is not productive. We have to address it.
Another thing that comes in here is, you know, we always talk about, we teach people how to treat us, but we're also teaching our children how to be treated. Yep. Because if they're looking at their parents and mother is just hiding in the corner or father's hiding in the corner and being submissive or weak and not setting boundaries, that's what the child learns.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's exactly
like you
right.
said earlier, they think that's okay. And when it comes to any type of abuse, whether it's physical or mental, I've seen this in so many cases where the child was physically abused, and then we've perpetuated, they are now abusing their children.
That's correct.
And
that's
somewhere
exactly right.
we have to break this cycle.
We do, and that's what setting boundaries does. Whether that be in our own homes or that be with politicians that are running amok in a governmental system that is not working properly or only working for 3 people. We have to set boundaries, and we have to shine a light on that in all areas of our life. And the place that we can start, because it's the place that we spend most time, is in our interpersonal relationships. We have got to teach our children differently. The children are the solution for everything, but they have to be taught values. They have to be taught what is acceptable behavior.
We've been talking a little bit about abuse here. Let's if somebody is in the process of being abused, especially if it's physically, is that the time to set the boundary?
Well, if it's physical abuse, the thing that I work with people that are being physically abused is to involve the authorities where they live. They need to get out of that particular circumstance, because no matter how much they think that the abuser will change, and no matter how many times, and I know this from personal experience, how much the abuser will say, I'm going to change and I'm really, really sorry for that particular behavior, they are not going to change without professional help. They have got to want to change. They've got to understand that their behavior is not appropriate, and then they've got to go and work on that in order to change, because they have issues and anger issues and rage issues that they're projecting onto someone else.
Right. Yeah.
They need to get out.
You need to let the situation diffuse before you get into the boundary discussions in some cases.
And Kenny, in some cases like that, in physical violence, then you're not going to penetrate that. That needs to be handled by someone else, because there's no way that you can control or change that. In physical abuse, forget it. Remove yourself, remove the children, move forward, because you need to take care of yourself, because you cannot change that. And no promise that I'm going to change, I'm going to get help, no promise is going to do that. Let them promise and get help while you're out of that circumstance. Because if not, you are leaving yourself open to allowing them to continue to abuse you.
Yep.
Well, let's take this back to a level that's, outside of that physical abuse, because I think we all agree those are circumstances that need immediate attention, as you said, involving the authorities, getting out of the situation. But there's so many cases of abuse that are not physical. They are literally people encroaching on you, and they're not that severe. So maybe you're in a situation where it's a little terse, it's a little tension, you're disagreeing. Is it really, when you're at that point where you're in a disagreement with someone, is that the right time to set the boundary?
Well, Cheryl, in my experience, and I'm sure that you and Kenny have had this too, and that, there is no time other than the present. Everything else is already over with, or the future's not really a real moment in time. It's only the present's next moment over to the infinite. So the time to do anything is in the moment when the behavior is happening. It's like when you discipline a child, or when you speak with a child, or don't put your hand on the stove, you don't do that 10 minutes later. So unless there is physical abuse, then I think that taking a breath and addressing that in the moment, and it does take practice, but to do it in the moment is the right time to do it.
Well, and what's important is, sorry, Kenny, I'm just checking in here, is sometimes tempers are high, and the discussion becomes emotional more than it is calm to say this is not acceptable, because you were talking earlier about that phrase, you make me feel, and when two people get into that kind of tussle, and, in your ego boxing, that's what you're talking about, calmer minds aren't prevailing at that point in time.
That's right.
So
That's
what's your recommendation for when the minds aren't calm?
Right. The person that bringing the greater awareness needs to be the one that remains calm, because remember, setting a boundary is not about control, it's not about manipulation, and it's not about blame. And so you really have to approach this with a calm, and you really have to also own it by I feel, not the blame. And because if there's just going to be the blame game, that's basically ego boxing, and it's not going to accomplish anything. The whole solution for this is that you've got to step above and beyond ego. You have got to come with the higher wisdom of something that's much greater than yourself, that essence. That's where the peacefulness can be there. That's where the owning the responsibility for your own behavior. When you do this, I feel this. I want you to do this. There's no blame in there. Okay, so if people are coming at it from the ego boxing perspective and they're in the moment and they're heated, that's not the time to set a boundary. You need to walk away.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I've been involved in a relationship years and years and years ago that the rage would get so outrageous that the calm seemed to fuel the rage that was being thrown back in. Literally would have to walk away from it and let it diffuse a little bit. So the key here, no matter what situation you're in, is to tune into it. Don't buy into the stuff. Just tune into what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, and you'll know if it's time to go ahead and I'm with Regina about 90% of the time as far as do it now, set your boundary now. No time like the present. But do not do that if it's going to escalate. If you feel like it's going to escalate something. But again, don't let that become an excuse.
Yeah, Kenny, and the other thing is that do not do that if you're not willing to stand back and not be one that participates in the escalation. See, that's where the higher level of understanding comes in, and that's the only thing that might be heard. I'm not saying that it will 100% of the time, but any time that I have been effective in establishing a boundary, it came from a place that was not ego. It came from a place of being like a witness to this and saying, I feel this. When you do this, I want this. And it was just stating a fact. It wasn't blaming. It wasn't controlling. It wasn't trying to, to even change the other person. We set boundaries for ourselves. We do not set boundaries to change other people. We set boundaries to change us.
Exactly. Like
and we're setting boundaries to protect ourselves in a lot of ways, too.
That's correct.
To
Absolutely.
Say, this is my heart, this is my soul, this is my life, and this is hurtful, and I need you to stop this. So let me ask you this question, because I absolutely hear what you're saying. We need to be the calmer mind that prevails. But I can also hear people listening to this conversation to say, but I can't because they're pushing this button or they're doing that. How do you help? What advice do you give for that person to say, okay, you're at this high stress period. I hear you saying walk it away, but what advice can you give me to get myself back to being grounded?
Sure. And when it would have been one of our previous conversations where you're talking about mastering a mind, because basically I would say, how is that working for you? Because you're fighting fire with fire, you're ego boxing, and that's not working. So if it's not working, we need to do something else. And you have to remain aware of your thoughts. You have to remain connected to your emotions. You have to remain responsible for your own behavior rather than looking for someone else's behavior to dictate how you're going to behave. Big deal.
Isn't that a great point? Because as I'm sitting here listening to this, it's like, we say we want to change their behavior, but that's not what's happening here. We're altering ours, and we're saying this is what's acceptable to me, and that brings us into this next subject. We set this boundary and say this is not acceptable behavior. I feel this way when you do X, Y, or Z, whatever the case may be. So we've set this boundary. How do we keep from caving?
Yeah, that's a big point, and that really is step 4, and that is be comfortable with being unpopular. Okay? Because it's one of those things where any kind of change. Let me give you this example. I smoked cigarettes for 22 years, and boy, when I quit smoking, those people that were in my life that smoked no longer wanted to be around me. Why? Because it pointed out something, about their behavior that they no longer liked. I learned, at first I was hurt, but then I learned not to take it personally. So when you set a boundary out of greater love for yourself and respect for yourself, remember, it's from a greater level of consciousness because the behavior that you're having to endure is not positive. It is negative. So you're coming from the position of, I want positive behavior in my life. But when you do that, then it's like shining a spotlight, no matter how nice you are at saying it, on their behavior. So you're not going to become extremely popular. In the book, I talk about shooting the messenger. Erin Brockovich and all of that. Poor baby, she brings this, these horrible chemical spills to light that's impacting this town, and she's the one that gets in trouble for it. That's what happens when we call other people on their behavior. That's why it's imperative that we come from a place of love, the best place that we possibly can in setting these boundaries, because you're not going to become popular. Now, the second part of your question, how do we not cave? We remember that enabling, if we do not set this boundary out of a greater love for ourselves, knowing that this behavior is intolerable to create happiness and peace and balance and harmony, then we need to understand that we do not want to go back to the way it was. We cannot cave. Because we're inviting the same behavior as usual, and that will never change your circumstance. We're not talking about changing someone else. We're talking about changing your circumstance.
Right. And the one of the most important things that you can remember, that anybody can remember in this situation, is this is a perfect example of when that movie, Build It and They Will Come mentality does not work. You cannot set a boundary one time and expect it to take place. Sometimes it will, but it's follow-through. Just like Regina's saying, it's follow-through. Sometimes you're going to have to remind them. Sometimes
you will have
yourself.
to remind them. And the other thing that we need to do, and especially guys, is we have to be patient with folks. Let's say that your son throws his dirty underwear all over, and you've said a million times, and finally you sit down with him, look him in the eye very calmly, and say, listen, when you do this, it makes me feel this, and I want you to do this. And you continue to establish that same boundary with him over and over and over, and you give him time to change it. And when he does change it, then you say, thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
You don't go in and pick up the underwear.
It's really important that what you just said, and that is say thank you when they do the behavior that you have asked them to do.
That's correct.
Because
after
if you don't say thank you, if you don't say thank you for them doing what you've asked them to do, then they go, they don't care anyhow.
Mm-hmm. You're being disrespectful, and relationships are built on respect. And the thing I want to say once again is that once you set that boundary in that loving way, you do not go back on that boundary, because if you do, then you're being codependent and you're enabling these people to behave badly. That's what a lot of parents get into trouble with, because they want to be popular with their kids. And so they set this boundary, but then all of a sudden, 2 seconds later, the kid does it, and they don't correct that behavior again. Forget it. That child has learned that mom and dad don't really believe that. I don't really have to do that. Yeah. It's the same with adults, too.
Exactly. And when the frustration starts setting in, just remember this. You're changing at one rate of speed. They're changing or not changing at a totally different rate of speed. That's where the patience is required.
That's correct, Kenny.
You can't force them to learn and grow the same rate that you are.
That's
but
right.
You can help them get to where you need them to be, or where you think it's best. It's all kinds.
Yeah, we can be a positive example for that, because I really want to emphasize tonight that setting boundaries is something we do for us. It's the way that we connect to our needs and our wants and our desires and how we want to be treated, because we really do, when we love ourselves, and we know what love is, that's treating ourselves with patience and kindness and cooperation and support and all of these other behaviors, which love is. When we do that for ourselves, we do not want to be treated in a way that's bad. So this is all about loving ourselves. This is all about self-respect, because when I have healthy boundaries with other people, then I know those people who I want to have in my life, because they respect those boundaries. And people that do not respect those boundaries are not someone that I have to have in my life anymore, including family members. I have set boundaries out of a greater love for myself with intimate family members, parents, brothers, sisters. I have done that for periods of years. And in every case, I will say, I didn't do this to change them, but in every case, my setting that boundary and keeping it strong has resulted in their looking at their behavior, because they want to have me as part of their life.
And it helped to develop a better relationship.
Yes, it did, because I'm not going to be abused by your stuff that you're not dealing with. I've dealt with my stuff. You need to deal with your stuff. I'm not going to help you do that, you see, but I am not going to be around you until you do that, if you choose to.
Well, and it seems through all of this, because I know those are very difficult discussions to have, even though we know that we need to have them. But if we can have them with kindness and coming from that place of love, which you talk about all of the time, Regina, if we have that with a loving message coming through it, they know that we're not there attacking them. We're just saying, this isn't acceptable for me. You do whatever you want, but this doesn't work for me anymore.
That's correct. That's exactly right. Again, we're not doing this to change people. We're doing it to change us, because by changing us, our world changes.
Exactly.
You know, when I changed me for the better, my world changed for the better. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person that I've ever known and throughout my entire life has been here with me, even family members. But those people that are now with me are the people that are so respectful and loving and caring and make my life better for them being in it. You know, there was something very interesting that was said the other night on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, which is a wonderful, wonderful show, and it was by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, the woman who wrote that wonderful New York Times best-selling book, My Stroke of Insight. She's the neuroanatomist, Harvard-trained neuroanatomist that had a stroke and actually witnessed it. She's very famous on TED. You remember that?
Yeah.
But she said, you know, either people bring negative energy to you or they bring positive. I only want those people that bring the positive energy to me, you know. And that is amazing. What energy do we bring to a circumstance? We have to be responsible for that energy. So setting a boundary by saying, I don't want that energy around me because it makes me this, 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 and this.
Yes.
Regina, that's absolutely amazing. And, you know, on that note, it's hard to believe that we're getting ready to tie up this show. So before we let you go, will you just remind our audience how to reach you, your email address and your website? And, we're just so grateful you've been here tonight.
Oh, Cheryl, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you, too. It really is. I am Regina of Romancing Your Soul. That is the title of the book, Romancing Your Soul, A Guide to Leading with Your Heart, which is getting closer and closer to publication. Yay. My website is romancingyoursoul.com, and you can find me on Facebook. Romancing Your Soul is on Facebook. And if you will email me at regina@romancingyoursoul.com, I will send you about an 8-page How to Set Boundaries Out of Love for Yourself. It's an actual guide on how to do this. And I'll be happy to send it to any of the listeners that want to have this.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. So, Regina, thank you so much for being here. We know that you are back on our show on October 23rd, so we'll look forward to a continuing conversation. And, Kenny, it's been another interesting night. So out of this conversation with Regina, what are you taking away tonight?
You know, this whole conversation reminded me of a program that we do it's called We Train Our Robots. And we train people around us how to treat us in the way that we set or don't set boundaries. And as hard as that is to hear in a lot of cases, we don't necessarily teach somebody how to abuse us, but we teach them that it's okay to do that when we do not respond, or when we do not put a stop to it and set the boundary, like Regina said. So that was the one thing that I was reminded of was that I do, in a way, train everybody how to react with me. The people that have been in my life a long time, it may take a while for me to retrain them if they're doing something I don't like. So it's all about the follow through. You know, I can't just remind them one time or state a boundary one time and be done with it. I've got to follow through and continue that, and then it helps my relationship with them, and more than likely they're going to shift their relationship and their behavior with other people in their lives as well. So yes, it's not about changing them, but they're probably going to change a little bit. So.
Isn't it amazing to sit there and realize, because through all of what we have been saying on Simple Steps, and I know you do it in what you write with your websites too, is we talk about it's about changing our behavior. It is about what we want for ourselves, because we can't change another person. We cannot make another person happy, but we can teach them how to respect us. And that to me it's a simple thing to do, even though it may not be easy. Lord knows some of these things just aren't easy. And I think the other message that I got out of this is by not doing anything, by allowing the behavior to continue, we literally are saying to that person, it's okay to disrespect me, and it's okay. I'm condoning your abusive behavior, your disrespectful behavior. So by not making a decision, you make a decision. By not saying something, you allow that behavior to continue, and you then feel like the victim, even though you're the one that's saying it's okay.
Exactly. And these things are not always easy. It is simple. It's kind of what we teach It's simple, but it's not always real easy to take these steps. But when you take the steps, be prepared to follow through. Like I said, like Regina said, you may not be popular. And in one of my situations, as much of this as I have learned and as much of this as I have taught, I still had to have a total disconnect in one of my relationships because the boundary was not honored. And the only way that I could do anything about this was to stay in it and fight or walk completely away from it. Folks, sometimes you got to walk completely away from it, but like Regina said, this is all about self-love. You've got to have enough respect and admiration for yourself to make your life worth it.
You know, that takes so much strength to be able to do, but I think it is truly an important step for people that are being abused or disrespected, and abuse is a harsh word. So I tend to go back to the word disrespected more than anything else, because you want to have the people in your relationship that are supporting you. You want to be the one that is supporting other people, and if that type of relationship doesn't exist, you're right, you have to be able to walk away and say, this isn't working for me. And I'd add one more thing, this isn't working for me right now. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that at a later date, when you're in a different position, we may be able to deal with this differently. I still will ask for your respect and expect to get it, but just not right now because it isn't working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's you've got to make it work for you. Otherwise, you're in a struggle, and those struggles just lead to more and more and more issues that you have to deal with.
Oh, and isn't that exhausting?
It's that vicious cycle. And
it all just piles up, and you have to be able to say enough is enough, and do it kindly, but do it firmly. Set those boundaries, as Regina said, and then be willing to honor the boundaries that you've set and hold them. And I think that if we just want to be popular, then we're probably not in a very good place, and that takes a lot of time to get there. Well, tonight's just gone so quickly by, and before we get too far down the line, we really do want to extend our gratitude to Brent Carey. Brent's vision of sharing the positive press, the positive inspiration with the world is something that I know resonates with Kenny, and it resonates with me. And we're so grateful to be able to be on Empower Radio with so many other wonderful hosts and bring Regina on to here. So Brent, I know you're out there listening. Thank you. We're honored, grateful, and humbled by your vision. And to Andrew, who's sitting behind that console making sure we sound great. Hey, we love you guys. So glad you're here and back to help us go along. So, Kenny, you want to talk about next week's show?
Next week, Cheryl and I are going to turn the mics on ourselves, and we're going to discuss issues that the Facebook community is bringing to us. So please, if you have questions or ideas or anything you want to chat about, send us a message through the Simple Steps Real Change Facebook site. Excuse me, and we will do our best to get it on the show. But next week's all about your questions, and we're just going to chat about it and have lots of fun.
Well, and to me, it's one of these shows that we try and do at least once a month if possible, because we're listening to you when you're on Facebook. We're watching the comments. We're trying to respond as best as we possibly can. And sometimes typing just doesn't solve it. And we just want to have the opportunity to talk, so we'll hope you'll call in, although we know people are shy to talk on the radio. So again, you can post a message out on Facebook or simplestepsatme.com. Everyone, thank you so much for being here with us. Kenny, have a great rest of your week, and everyone too.
You too. Good night, everyone.
Good night.